That is unbelievably smooth. I don't know if you can see it. On this side, we have the lines from the Nick Joiner knife. Same here, same here. And that is off the sander. Looks like we still have a little bit right here that we could continue to sand, but wow, wow, wow. Hey, Scott from mygrowthrings.com here. Here once again is in my sister's basement, and finally we're back on to the Shopsmith Mark V. And in this case, we're going to be playing with a conical disc sander. What is a conical disc sander? We'll take a look at that. It's not even flat. What good is that? We'll talk about that in this video. So going back to the very earliest model of the Shopsmith tools back in 1947, the 10E and the 10ER, they had disc sanders. That was one of the basic 5 functions of the machine. And disc sanders are fantastic, especially if you're sanding an outside curve, the convex side of something. Can't really use a belt sander for that. And doing a curve like that, if you use a drum sander, for example, you're just going to create divots. So sanding against a flat disc is actually ideal. Problem comes in if you try to sand something straight. Now think about this. This disc is spinning counterclockwise or anti-clockwise if you're from the other side of the pond. And if you were to run your stock across this, part of the way the disc is moving straight down across the grain, while on the other side of the disc, it's moving straight up, also across the grain, but mostly lifting of the board. Another issue with this is if what I want to do is to run a straight edge against my fence and sand a perfectly parallel edge to that, I run into a big problem here in that in order to do any sanding of it, I'm going to catch the edge of my sandpaper with the corner of my wood, thereby peeling the sandpaper right off the disc. So by 1954, when the Mark V was being created and getting ready to come to market, they had thought about this problem and found a solution, and that was to add a set screw into the face of the head of the fence. And when you run that screw in against the fence rail on the Model 500, it will cant your fence away from the uphill side of the sander. And so you run your wood through this from the back side towards the front because you've canted the fence. There's now plenty of room, and you're only going to catch the abrasive while it's heading downhill. That dang set screw right there has caused us no end of trouble because people think it's there for alignment, and they'll use that to adjust their fence parallel to the blade and the miter slot. And then as soon as they remove the fence, the set screws move because they're not there for alignment, they're there for misalignment. The big bolts on the bottom here are used for alignment. As the years went on, Shopsmith added yet another set screw on the other face of the fence base. This approach continued to be used on the Mark V Model 510, introduced in the 1980s. We want to loosen the far end of the fence with this lever. We'll loosen the head of the fence, and then we use this set screw right here. Normally, I remove that set screw completely so as not to cause problems. But you notice as I turn that in, that has canted my fence. So with that set up properly, you can see that the board is clearing on the outfeed side here where the disc is moving straight up. But as we come forward, it would come into contact right about there, catching the bulk of the abrasive. There's a lot more abrasive out here on the outer inches of the sanding disc than there are in the center. And of course, we have adjustability by moving our quill forward into the wood to take measured amounts of stock off. Let's give this a try. I have no idea what we're rubbing against. Anyway, and we're getting scratch marks right across the edge of our board, but we are nice and straight, and that would be, in fact, parallel to the opposite edge. So can't we do better? So a little semi-accurate history. The Shopsmith line of tools were originally made in the 1940s and into the 50s by the company Magna Engineering, started by the original inventor and some investors. From there, the company was sold to Yuba Consolidated and operated through the 1950s into the early 60s. And in the early 60s, the company more or less went private with some investors from within the company, and that company became Magna American. And by that time, let's say 1964, all of the original inventors, engineers had left the company, and there was fresh blood there. And they re-envisioned the Shopsmith Mark V as a new machine that was christened the Mark VII. Now, some of the things that made the Mark VII different than the original Mark V and the 10ER was, in addition to the 5 basic functions, the table saw, the disc sander, the drill press, the lathe, and the boring machine, the Mark VII had in its base a dust collector of sorts. It also was tilting both directions, allowing you to have the headstock under the table when doing operations like shaping. By the way, the 1960s Mark VII is a Mark VII. Today, Shopsmith manufactures a machine that they also call a Mark VII using the number 7. That's built more or less on a Shopsmith Mark V platform with the legs on the end, where the Mark VII of the 1960s had that container underneath it that held dust. All right, we're caught up. In 1964, when the Mark VII was introduced, one of the things that it featured was a conical sanding disc. Now, it was different than this one. This is the one that Shopsmith makes today. What was unique about it is it was made of aluminum, and the face of it was flat, just like a standard sanding disc, and the backside was tapered. So you would use that sander for your normal sanding, and then when you wanted to do what I'll show you here in just a minute using the tapered side, you would raise that up through a slot in the table, just like a saw blade, and you would use it in that manner on the back side of the disc. Now, fast forward to about 20 years ago, and Shopsmith saw a need to bring a conical sander back to the market. It hadn't been made since at least the late 60s. And the engineers at that time had a great idea, and that was not just use it for sanding wood, as we're watching in this video, but to also use it for sharpening joiner and planer knives. We're going to cover that in next week's video. And by the way, if you're watching this in the future, that video is linked below, you time traveler, you. But let's see how this works. Need to remember to back off that set screw so it doesn't give me trouble. And we're going to take off the sanding disc, but we will leave the lower guard in place for some dust collection. In its place goes the conical disc. And then we're going to adjust our table, tilting it inward 4 degrees. If you look at this now, if I were to put a square against this, I hope you can clearly see the fact that we've got a huge gap here while we're touching at the bottom. So we'll tilt our table 4 degrees. And we'll raise it up, get ourselves up into the meat of the disc. And let's check to make sure that we are, in fact, now square to the disc, which we are. And we can bring our fence over. So right now you can see we're clearing. And if I want to get this to sand, I can do one of 3 things. I can move the fence closer to the disc. I can move the disc closer to the fence. I can do that on the Shopsmith because I can move my quill in and out. Or I can actually lower the table. Lowering the table has the effect of bringing the disc closer to the edge of the table, closer to the fence. So you can see here, I drop it down a ways, and we can put a stop to stop us at a preset distance if we want. Now I'm coming into contact with the disc. You see, let's give this a shot. One of the challenges I have is I got a tripod back there I just ran into. That caused me to lift it into the disc. But we now have a nice, smooth, I mean, smooth as a baby's bottom edge on that. No cross grain scratches whatsoever. In fact, that's nicer than my jointed edge. Let's do this edge. Another situation where you might want to use this setup is with something that is highly figured, where you maybe no matter which way you go on your joiner, it's wrong. In this case, I have a piece of spalted. What is this stuff? This is, oh, it'll come to me. Tamarind. That's what it is. It's tamarind. And let's go ahead, and I've got three faces jointed. However, the jointer has some nicks in it. If only I had a way of sharpening my joiner knives to get rid of those nicks. But this edge right here was cut parallel on the bandsaw, and it's close, but not quite right. So let's use this to give us a nice parallel face. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and bring the disc forward because I don't want to have this overhanging the edge any more than I really have to. I don't want to give this sander a mechanical advantage over me. We talk about it sanding in the direction of the grain. However, when you first enter, if this is doing its job, it is doing some sanding that's slightly downward or across the grain until it passes the 12 o'clock mark, at which point the abrasives are running parallel to the edge. A little bit more here. Again, take a look at that. If you can see, we've got saw marks from the bandsaw. So we can take care of that. We are at a point where it makes sense to use a abrasive cleaning stick to clean off the swarf that's building up on the sanding disc. We'll move the table away. And just in case you were wondering, yes, I did put a mask on for sanding that spalted wood. We don't want to get any of those spores in our lungs. That is unbelievably smooth. I don't know if you can see it. On this side, we have the lines from the nick joiner knife. Same here, and that is off the sander. Looks like we still have a little bit right here that we could continue to sand. But wow. So I'd love to say that's it. There's more to this, but I'm going to leave it to our midweek follow-up. If you don't know this, we record a follow-up session to the weekend video, answering your questions, comments, cheap shots, addressing any contributions that you have to offer to this topic. And just so you know, my channel members have already been discussing the conical disc sander over on the community tab in a private conversation. If you're curious at all about how channel membership works and the benefits of it, check that out in the link in the video description. Some would say it's cheaper than a cup of coffee because it actually is. And anyway, I look forward to answering your questions, comments, cheap shots midweek. I was thinking that I was going to have to fake my way through sharpening the joiner knives next week, and I realized I have nicks in my knives, so we'll absolutely be doing that next week. So in the meantime, thank you, channel members, for all your support, and y'all make it a great week.